Now, shot one, we have a look at what's going on here, right? Look at the example, and what we want to start with are the keys, right? So the most extreme pose changes that you go through are looking here and then looking here. So that would be sort of the first thing. The other thing you'll notice in shot one is the camera is tilting up. So that's supposed to be when you turn, right? And there's that slow look up. So the camera is going to be timed, right? It's already moving, and we got to move our character to sort of push the camera up at the top there and then settle. And we also need some time to start to go back down. So you can grab all the timing that you need from the reference video as a starting point. You can also see that in addition to these main keys where you just have sort of start pose, then maybe a transition pose going down, and then a final pose up over here, say like around 43, and then continue to tilt up, right? That there's also stuff you can do to kind of do like a drag, right? So you can see there's drag as the lamp goes down, the head snaps up, and as you push up, the neck drags down. You can also put in those breakdowns if you want early on. But where I would start is the simplest and say, well, I need to be here, and then I need to be here, right? So I might look at that and say, okay, well, frame 41, right? There's an important key, so that's looking at the ball. And then frame one, I'm starting here. So that would be where I would start, is making those two keys. And then I have to figure out, well, okay, I'm gonna turn, but you can see in the example, the lamp actually goes up a little bit. It anticipates before it goes down, and then it pushes up. So then we can add more detail. But I would start with just those poses and then add more detail once I've got that figured out. So I've already got frame one kind of posed. Maybe I'll move this over a little bit, make it more of a 3/4 view. And I'm going to grab everything on the lamp and hit S on frame one just to start the key process. So everything's keyed. And then at frame 41, I know that the lamp needs to turn around and look up. And this, that needs to be turned, right? If that stays still, this is gonna feel like The Exorcist, you know, when like the kid just turns around, right? It's just the head. It's gonna be really freaky, right? It's the only thing that moves is rotate Y. It's gonna make the ball run away in fear, right? So I wanna make sure that the whole body is moving, and the neck of the lamp should move as well. So for this, I would probably get out of my camera view and go look in perspective view and say, yeah, that looks really broken, right? So I'm here at this point. Let's just hit S, and I'm here, right? Nothing's moving. It's so isolated. So what I would try to do is, well, the neck should probably boom out to the side a little bit. And even here, if I look from a top view, the head isn't even moving, right? If you're going to turn around, your head moves. It doesn't stay in one spot because your body is moving, right? If you look at Indiana Jones, even though he doesn't move very much, you can't just stay in one place and turn, right? It's impossible for us to do that. But in the computer, we can, and it feels so locked. It feels so, you know, artificial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move the lamp head a little bit and just sort of say from here to here, I'm at least going to get a little bit of movement, so that when I start like this and then turn, I get a little bit of movement. So the head actually goes in a different place on screen. And I'm looking in the top view or side view just to see what happens with the neck of the lamp. Does that look too twisted? Should I move, oops, should I move this over a little bit more, right? Just to make sure that I'm working with the neck and the head all together as one unit, rather than treating them as isolated things. Go back to shot one. I'll sort of look. Now, in the example video, let's look at what frame 41 looks like. There we go. I could use that as sort of a guide and see in mine, it looks like I'm looking up a lot higher, and I'm looking also to the side more. So I'm just going to adjust that, tone that down a little bit. And this gives me this. Okay. Now, one of the reasons I did this demo here is to show you something very annoying. Gimbal, right? So this is like what most animators will run shrieking from a room as soon as you say that word. Gimbal lock. And what it means is that the rotations are getting all tangled up. If you look at how simple the idea was, I was rotating rotate Y, okay? One thing. But have a look over here and tell me, is only one thing moving? Can you all tell me what's going on? Anyone? Is only one rotation firing, or are all of them firing?
Just
All of them.
All the rotation.
All of them. So that's gimbal lock. So that means what you're looking at is not the real math. What you're looking at is a preview, right? Object mode. And what we want to do is, if you want to see what the real math is doing, we use a mode called gimbal. You can get into gimbal mode by just clicking on a rotation, and you can see that it changes, right? And then when you're in gimbal mode, right, if I'm in rotate Y, right, then I can see, oh, I see, it's rotate Y, but look what happens. Some weird stuff happens when you're in gimbal mode. What you'll discover is that there are places where the axes can actually get tangled up with one another, right? So why is this? Well, don't blame me, blame vector calculus. This is all part of calculus. So if you like vector math, this will make total sense to you. If you don't, you're just gonna be frustrated like me. What happens here is when I bring Y, when I'm rotating Y, it's moving X, but it's not moving Z. So what happens is the rotations basically have a rotation order. Who's the top priority? If I grab Z and move Z, you'll see that all three of them move. So Z is the most important. It has the highest priority. It moves the other two. If I grab Y, Y cannot move Z. It can move X, and X is at the end of the chain. Think of it kind of like an arm. The shoulder is Z, the elbow is Y, and X is the wrist. This one can move the other two. This one cannot affect the parent, right? It can only move downstream, and this one cannot affect the elbow or this. It's just part of the vector math, right? That you have this sort of rotation order. Now, this is something that you just want to try as an animator and see what's going on. I'm trying to do something really simple, right? All I want to do is turn the head, and in the middle, it's doing some weird stuff. All these weird helicopter kind of movements that are going on, weird rotations. And you know, the keys are fine. Like, the keys are so straightforward. Why is it doing this? That usually means it's gimbal lock. Now, how do you get out of this problem? Well, luckily, what you can do is you can change the rotate order. But it's good to do a test early, because if you change the rotate order, basically which one is in charge, the highest level, it will change the poses, right? So I usually do a test early on, and ideally when you look at the rotations, you look and see what's doing the most. In this case, it's rotate Y. That means rotate Y should be the shoulder. It should be Y, then it should be Z, and then it should be X. That should be the order. But you don't see it here in the channel box. It's not obvious. You have to go digging for it. It lives in the attribute editor, and you have to find the control. So you have to keep scrolling down through here until you find, or is it up through here, until you find the curve way at the top. There's the control. And you'll see this rotate order, right? Now, again, to make it even more confusing, reading left to right means that it's higher priority as you go towards the right. So X is the wrist, right? And then Y is the elbow, and then Z is the shoulder, right? This is the analogy. So Z is the top priority, and Y is in the middle, and X is the baby at the end. What I want is I want Y to be at the end. So there's two choices, this one and this one. I'll try them and see. If I switch that, you see how it changed the pose, right? So if you do this after you've blocked out a scene, as I've done, then you have to go and reblock the whole shot, which is really annoying, which is why it's good to do a test early on and see what's going to happen, what's going to get gimbal lock. So I'll just go and zero out the rotations again and just say, well, let's just put this back at 0, just like this. And there's my start pose, right? I'll just copy this over here, right? And then all I want to do is move this one and say, okay, now when I move Y, right, I still got gimbal lock, but it's behaving much better, okay? If I really wanted to be careful, then what I would do is, instead of working in, with my tool, instead of working it in object mode, I could work in gimbal mode. And then it will always show me the math. So if I go here, let's just delete this. I'll just go and grab that key. And then I will now use Y, and you see how the channel box is behaving? It's only Y that's changing, and then I'll just push X up a little. So this just keeps the rotations a little cleaner, right? So now it's behaving properly. I'm not getting any of this weird tilting that's going on. It just makes life a little bit easier, all right? And as I mentioned,
in gimbal mode then?
sorry, say again?
Do we always just work in gimbal mode? When
You
we're
can,
recording?
but it's also frustrating because unfortunately with gimbal mode, eventually you'll get a point where things will cross up. And then what do you do if you're like this and you want to rotate it here? Then you have to go to object mode to have any chance of doing this, right? So that's the problem. Now you're always going to get into gimbal because there's only three dimensions in our universe, right? So you're stuck, right? So one of them will hopefully be the one that you want to move the most, but there's a good chance you're going to get into gimbal. And as an animator, you just accept that and say, well, look, I want the longest number of frames to have no problems, right? When you're doing very fast action, gimbal's not a problem because you're basically doing every frame. Somebody's jumping and kicking and doing all this stuff. But the worst part is when you have very smooth, long movements where there's a huge number of frames. If you get gimbal lock in that, it's very hard to fix frame by frame. You basically, every frame you're trying to fix and you get a lot of noise and chatter, basically trying to undo stuff. So what I'll usually do is if I'm looking at a character, I'll see what is the character doing. So let's say they're doing ice skating and they're going to be spinning a lot, right? That is rotate Y. I would have to make sure that's the top priority because I'm going to be spinning that character for thousands of degrees. And if I don't get that right, I'm going to have gimbal lock the whole time. That means every time the character spins, they're going to wobble. I can't animate somebody skating like that. So I have to make a decision, right? That's going to just save me that hassle. Now, other parts, I could run into some difficulties, but if what they're doing is mostly a big spin, I just want to make sure that's the top priority. Okay. Now, the nice thing too is that if you get confused and you don't know what this is or remember, you only have 6 choices. So you could just play the odds. I just want to make sure that I'm in gimbal mode so I can see, well, what happens? I can see, well, this is the danger here with this one is if I move Z a lot, then I'm off axis, right? So I have to be careful and not use Z very much. I can still use X. That's really good, right? And I can use Y, but I could also test this one and say, well, what about this one? Does this do the same thing? Yeah, that works. That's good. I can still tilt up and down. Yeah, that's good, right? That seems to work pretty well. What if I use Z? Yeah, then that still works. So, you know, either of these, I would just do a little test and see what's in the storyboard. What do I have to do? And try and pick an order that makes sense. And both of these seem to work really well, right? I'm just going to be tilting up and I'm just going to be rotating this way. I'm not going to be doing a lot of this, right? So when I look at this, the one thing I don't like about this is like if I tilt Z, then X doesn't come along, right? So X would stay here. And then now when I want to wag the head or nod the head, it would be off axis. So I might do a test and say, let's try that one. And then see that if I wobble Z, I know I'm always going to have sort of the center line following. So that seems to work. I'm happy with that. And then I just have to go to my camera sequence, sorry, my shot camera, and then make sure that I'm turned this and angled it so it looks like we're looking in the right spot, and then just see what the computer's going to do. Yay, no gimbal issues. Now, I know for a lot of you that aren't going to be in the animation stream, you're probably going to be forgetting this, but this affects cameras as well. And one of the most common things to do with a camera is a pan, which is a rotate Y. And the default is always X, Y, Z, which means Y is in the middle. So those of you going into visual effects or modeling and doing these really nice sweeping camera moves, you're going to run into gimbal. But the important take-home message is just to know what gimbal mode is, how to use it, and how it can help you diagnose problems. The biggest symptom is when you have 2 keys that are very simple, just a simple rotation, but the in-betweens do something really bizarre. The roll happens. And you sit there going, I didn't ask for that. Why is it doing that? And it could be a graph editor problem, but most of the time with gimbal, it means that the 3 axes are starting to fight one another. You're getting into a place where they get tangled up. Always pay attention to the channel box and see what's going on, right? And I know that Y should be doing most of the work. If I move Y, does Y only move? If I change this into object mode, you'll see that Y does not move only Y, it moves the other two. So that gets noisy. So if I switch to gimbal mode, it's the same as clicking on the channel box and say, no, I just want to move in Y, go to X, I just want to move in X, or I just want to move in Z to do. So if rotate Y, if I'm doing a camera pan, I got to pick one of these two. Y has to be the most important thing at the end. If I'm doing a tilt, right? If I'm doing a camera tilt, then that would be X. Okay, if that's the most important thing, then I might make X. I would pick one of these where X is at the end. Okay, but there's no hard and fast rule, right? The most important thing is understanding what could be causing the problem and where you might go to fix it. Okay, and as mentioned, you can always try the Euler filter in the graph editor, which lives under curves, Euler filter. Doesn't always work. It's kind of a one-trick pony. You just cross your fingers and hit the button. And if the curves move, it might solve a problem.